Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bill and Ammons Bogus Hangout. I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves and go around the circle. Zara, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Altair. I write content for the web.
Kim?
Kim Grausberg, accessibility and usability consultant.
Steve?
Steve Grenzer with Steam Driven Media, mostly PPC and complaining about clients these days.
Doc?
Doc Sheldon of Intrinsic Value SEU, and I just complain about everything.
Terry?
Terry Van Horn. I'm no longer in business.
And I'm Bill Slosky of SEO by the Sea, and I'm the Director of SEO Research for Go Fish Digital. So I've shared a link to a post with many of y'all of a blog post I just wrote a couple days ago on answer passages or answers to questions and a machine learning way of answering those questions that looks a lot like the way RankBrain works, where it uses word vectors to figure out all the words in the question and try to find answers to it on pages. It's a completely new way, a different way of answering questions. It's not the way featured snippets are supposedly answered, but Google's finding lots of ways to answer questions now.
Yeah, I found it interesting in that it cut down computation and cycles, which would mean that'd be important at Google.
And we've been seeing statements from Google like they're using RankBrain on all the sites now. So they're expanding their use of word vectors a lot, maybe everywhere.
Is that because it works well with machine learning?
I think it probably works well with machine learning. Yeah. Well, it is machine learning process.
Right.
Well, RankBrain is machine learning process.
Whereas the others are more neural networks, correct?
Neural networks is a machine learning process too.
Oh, okay.
And I thought it was interesting because it goes directly to the text itself and looks for the corresponding words. What is it, first to the left and then to the right? But
well, are you thinking of bird?
That's a bird.
Yeah.
So this is like if Googlebot stopped just looking for links and said, okay, I'm going to read the words on a page and try to understand what words are being used and what words that are similar to that word are often used with that word that have been missed, that aren't there. Because it looks for co-occurring words and it tries to understand which words should maybe be next to something that aren't. And that's possibly how it answers questions. You know, what words are usually with this word in a question and answer type pair? And it'll use that to find pages that might be the answers to queries.
So does it find sets of pairs? So say it's looking at a particular text and there's the word that is in the query, and then in that text are other words that normally go with that word. Does it use all of those words?
Some words tend to be used with other words really frequently, like amazing and Spider-Man. You always see them together.
We lost Doc.
His ISP is acting up.
It's the polar shift. He said it would happen.
I'm not sure if it should happen first in warm countries.
Yeah.
And I think he's in a warmer country than ours.
Yeah. So what do you think, Bill? How does that impact writing for the web? That's of course my question. You know.
So when I read about answer passages, which were similar to passage ranking,
Right.
they talked about doing things like using headings to understand context on pages. With a word vector approach, you don't care about headings.
Right. So that means that it can be very specific with I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling, but it can be very specific with the text that it finds that has the most specific answer to the query. That's my understanding.
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
That it means that headers are not.
Yeah.
The answer that is the most specific, it can find that answer. It doesn't need the header clues to go here. You know, it's like headers are signposts, but it doesn't necessarily require that anymore. I mean, the idea of looking at all that text is kind of mind-boggling, but
Well, Google looks at all that text anyway.
yeah. Hi, Thomas.
Because you have programs that index everything, so they collect all the words that are on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hi guys.
So if they're actually understanding what the word means and what are related words when they're indexing the words, it's not too much of a bigger step away.
No, it's not.
So if they're trying to understand what is being said on a page and whether or not it answers a query that someone has, it's different than the old-fashioned Google bot we used to know years ago that's looking for 301s and 302s.
Right.
But it's actually understanding what pages are about. And we've sort of come to expect that from Google's indexing anyway, when it starts to rank things for relevance and materiality, or number of links, 30.
I can already see responses to this that they, oh, well, if it doesn't use headers, we don't need headers anymore, which is, you know, kind of false logic, because they help.
Headings help
understand what's there on the page once they get to the page.
Headings help me write. They help me group content into sections and then write, and having a heading for a section, an area that I'm writing about, makes my writing better.
Yes, I agree. I can just see, you know, crazy claims coming out.
I was actually thinking the same thing, because for accessibility for the screen readers, they sort by headings. That's how they scan those pages so fast. So if you take the headings out, you've just taken away a tool.
Right, exactly. So I'm just saying, you know how people misread stuff? And yeah, I can see there's going to be a flurry of that kind of.
Well, a lot of people write without headings, and they write without pictures.
Yeah,
they don't include those things.
I definitely prefer writing with headers and pictures, but that's just
I think
me.
everybody does. I think everybody does, but Bill's right. A lot of people don't do that. So
Yeah, most of the content on the web isn't indexed by Google for that reason, I think, or not just for that reason, because the content's no good as well.
Most of the content isn't indexed.
Most of it that Googlebot exempts from indexing once it's indexed it and decides that it's not going to. You in Search Console, when it tells you like this page has been exempt, unless there's a technical issue with the page, it's probably because it's poor quality content or it's duplicate content or something like that. It'll read it. It will read the page, of course, but then it will decide to exempt it from the from Search Console under certain situations.
So just out of curiosity, what happens if there's a page that's exempted because, say, it has thin content, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And then the site owner goes back and creates content that's relative and on target and informative and organized and all those things. Does that mean Google will never go back and look at that page?
No, it will. I'm sorry. Googlebot will go back and index that page or look at the page. It'll crawl it. It'll just, unless it's actually worth something to Google, it'll leave it out of the index. I think to try to help the site owner, probably for crawl budget or, just to keep stuff out of Google that isn't as common. Plus, it'll actually, to be correct, when it shows less relevant results at the bottom of the page for the SERPs, these might not be as. Sometimes it'll show that content there, but I'm talking about mostly duplicate content on site and things like that, like really, really spammy, bad content. That's what I've noticed in the exempt stuff. But to answer the question correctly, though, Googlebot, of course, crawls it because it wouldn't understand what it is without crawling it.
Not going to introduce you to information gain.
Yeah, I think the one of the posts about sitemap URLs was interesting. I know we were talking about that last week, that the new sitemap URL format can actually reset it in Google and sometimes give it a. So if you had, I think it was it Steve or Doc that was talking about it last week, having the either sitemap_index being found if there's an error on your sitemaps.
So changing the sitemap URL might have a positive effect.
Right. I recently, did a migration and put the old Screaming Frog, the old sitemap, and then put old sitemap URL and indexed well. But yeah, I've seen big changes, especially if like the server is throwing errors where it might show the site, the time is just all zeros for the publish time. It'll have some problems crawling the site, and then I think that's a interesting thing from Google that's saying that if you change the URL structure, it'll actually pick up on the differences.
Of course, it treats every URL as unique, so of course it's going to notice that.
Yep.
There's a paper that I want to send to you, but it's on my laptop and I'm afraid to like mess up what I'm doing here on my desktop. But listen to this title: Quantifying Human Perceived Answer Utility in Non-Factoid Question Answering.
That sounds like a doctoral candidate going for his thesis defense.
Yep. But it's interesting. It's part of a whole bunch of videos that are kind of related to search and information gathering and Q&A and all kinds of stuff. I have to, Bill, you might have seen this in Twitter. I'm not sure. Because that's how I found it. But anyway, I'll send it to you because the videos they're presentations of these papers, and they're in your brain realm. They're like, I'm here, you're up here. The papers are up here too.
Non-factoid questions and answers, huh?
Yeah, yeah, and that was just one. There was a couple that I listened to. An intent taxonomy for questions asked. Where was the rest of that? In web search. And that one. So that looked interesting. There's like a whole pile of these things. And, you know, like I read these things, I watch the videos, and then I try to put it in my you know, marketing brain, accessibility brain, you know, all that, and try to see where it all fits. I mean, the data and the research is never ending.
Those sound like the titles that Susan Dumas, who wrote the paper on latent semantic indexing, or the patent on latent semantic indexing wrote. She worked for Microsoft for a number of years on findability.
Ah.
And she wrote a bunch of things about search and user generated content and user behavior.
Yeah. I belong to a research organization where I get these studies every month of the human behavior and search side, and it blows my mind. But a lot of the research is not from our country; it's from like China.
Yeah,
and you know, we don't seem to be doing. I mean, I'm sure we are, but you know, there's just so much information out there.
I signed up to do usability studies from Google, and every once in a while they'll send me a project, information about a project, and a form to fill out to see if I can qualify to do it. And they usually turn me down. They usually won't let me. I get to the point where they ask if I'm in marketing, and I say yes, and they say you're not qualified.
I've seen that same thing happen.
So the last one I actually got to do was about a YouTube project. And they actually taped me looking at YouTube videos and deciding which were the ones I wanted to see answers to, queries.
They studied your eye movement and things like that?
They were tracking comments I was making while watching the videos because they were curious about how people went about finding answers to questions about videos.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So your comments were in the survey, but not on the YouTube page, as it were?
They were introducing premieres, and they were talking about content creators at YouTube. So there's some specialist YouTube people who make videos that are about different topics that are unique to YouTube. And they were asking about questions about finding those premieres or finding something very new on subjects.
Oh, I see, because premieres are new. Okay.
I hate premieres.
Well, there was a study that I was reading on similar to what you were going through, what you were being studied for, Bill. And they were, you know, what is the experience when you're being timed? Like if you know you only have a minute to find what you want, is that experience different than if you know you have all the time in the world? And that was an interesting study too, you know, and I mean, it's interesting.
So
it's
the
like,
earlier,
you don't think about
the earlier days of the web when you had UX people like Jared Spool and Jacob Nielsen writing competing pages, articles, do users scroll? Yes, they do. No, they don't.
Right.
And they each had their reasons, and sometimes the reasons were good ones as supporting them, but sometimes they contradicted each other. It was actually fun reading those.
Yeah. I always said people will scroll until they get the answer they want.
I think in some cases, Hotjar is an interesting way of proving whether they will or not. It depends on what it depends on what it actually and how badly they want it, I guess.
And Jared Spool would say it depends on how the page is set up. If there are lots of horizontal rules on a page and it looks like you can't move down any further on the page itself, people will stop scrolling.
Yeah.
I've found on the last 3 mouses that I've worn out that the thumb button for back is what wears out the most for me. Before the scroll wheel, before anything else, that back button just gets hammered. And I think that says a lot about how I personally use the internet. If I'm not getting what I want there, I'm out. I'm off to the next one. And I wonder how many. I mean, it'd be fun to do that kind of a study where you could do some embedded hardware tracking on people and how they use their mouse when they're browsing the internet, and see just.
There, but,
Yeah, there are a lot of people who don't use the mouse anymore. They use
the finger,
trackpad, fingers, and stuff.
Yeah, I think you find a big difference between devices too, between a telephone and a web and a desktop.
I just found one. My mouse, my rules. Privacy issues, behavior rule, user profiling via mouse tracking. There you go.
It'll be fine.
I found out by adding chaptering in a lot of cases, that's helped people scroll. I don't know if you call clicking on a chapter link scrolling, but I guess moving down the page, that's helped a lot with usability. You give them a table of contents at the top that isn't too ridiculous.
Search engines
Also
are
using anchored links at the top of the page to go deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
that
hashtag.
used to be an old technique that we all use. No one uses it anymore.
Well, I think it's good for usability. I'm not saying like just create a giant table of contents like we used to, but just have a few of them so people can get, if you're putting out like 3,000 words, have people be able to get to the section that they want to read quickly.
It's also the way articles are written. If you have a whole bunch of nonsense for the first 2 paragraphs, I usually don't get past those 2 paragraphs. Should outline what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, that
and
was
give some details that makes people want to read further.
Yeah, that was one of my problems with it. Doesn't happen quite so much now, but like a couple of years ago with storytelling,
That's a
somebody would
professional.
start
writer
out when I
have
was
that
on the
problem.
train from Moscow to and then 3 paragraphs later you get to theoretically how this story relates to whatever the topic of the article was. And it used to make me so angry. Just tell me what I want to know. I don't need to know about your train experience. And I felt that was one of the ways that people totally misuse storytelling as engagement.
So there was a survey on Twitter asking if there's a shortage of SEO talent on the web. And
really.
I'm just wondering, is there a shortage of storytelling talent on the web?
I think so.
I was reading an article, I wish I could find it right now, a couple of days ago where somebody submitted thousands of pages to a readability tool like what you see in like the SEO plugins.
Yeah.
And they were going on and on and on about how much more readable the internet is, and therefore it's better. So some people took the counterpoint that when you submit great short story science fiction, The Last Word from Asimov and things like that, they all score horribly in these readability tools. But if you put something like almost to the level of Dr. Seuss, they get green stars everywhere. Yeah. And it's like it's not that the writing is so much better. It's that it's so dumbed down and generic. And what they found was things that were descriptor, where you were describing instead of just saying the ball. It's like the red ball scored worse.
Yeah.
It was a really readability applies to SEO or not.
Well, and
thinking.
General consensus was that computers doing readability studies for humans is probably not ready yet.
Yeah.
Because what people find entertaining and fun to read is not necessarily what a computer or a search engine will find entertaining and fun to read.
Right. It's kind of like all bets are off when you're looking at
readability has to do with length of sentences and stuff as well. Like a lot of it.
And grade level.
Matching user intent is left out in most of those tools.
I think you got to write to the audience, and readability is not something that's really important.
Usually when I take over a new SEO client, the first thing I do is go in and turn that feature off in Yoast, because the clients look at that and they go, oh, but it didn't get a green dot. And it's like, just pretend those dots don't exist.
Yeah.
I always tell them, you know what that means? If it's green, it means your content's written for kindergartners.
Yeah. Written for elementary school and that. And if you're selling to elementary school people, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
But hopefully that's not, I mean, it's really dumbed down a lot of stuff on the web.
Well, for me, the Yoast thing is still, what's the word? Tilted toward keywords.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's like if you keyworded your article, you could get a green dot, but what does that mean? Nothing,
Well, it means that you repeated stuff a whole bunch of times, which makes it
a
crappy.
Put some synonyms in there too.
It's the same as when people come into a forum and they go, I don't understand why I'm not ranking well. I've got a really high DA. And it's like, that's a Moz rating that has nothing to do with actual search.
Anything else sane.
I always say if you got a 9+, you should be ranking for almost everything, though. Even though it's a Moz rank, you should be getting indexed. Probably.
I've seen Moz call stuff spam that wasn't even close to it. The tools are all crap.
Well, it's like in the old days with the old PageRank green bar. I mean, we had gambling bid directories, so we were having 7 and 8s, and it's like, how could this be good for anybody other than me? I'm the one selling these links. Of course, I love this, but it's not doing anybody else any good. So I never understood that, but I was happy to cash the check.
Having said what I said about the 9+, like you can outrank Wikipedia with a 2 or 3. I mean, it's that you're right. That score has almost no bearing on.
Wikipedia was placed at the top, like a featured snippet when it was there. Think about that. Because you don't see it I very seldom see Wikipedia in the top 10 now.
It started to go away, yeah.
Yeah, that started to go away.
I stopped paying attention to Wikipedia when actual authors of papers that were being cited were being told they couldn't contribute because they couldn't cite a source. Yeah. It's like, but I'm the source. How can it be anything better than me? And they're like, well, you have to be able to have it cited by a secondary source, otherwise it doesn't count.
I have a client that's been cited by the Wall Street Journal, New York, like you name it, everything. Yeah. And they said nope. And then he's got a guy that's in the same industry, InfoSec, and they actually he started very early. His only citation is his own blog.
Yeah.
The difference is he had a third party go in and add the
Well, he
thing.
did it 9 years before. That's like the big difference.
It was there forever. It got grandfathered in.
Right. They just haven't gotten around to possibly removing it.
One of the founders of virtual reality, Jared Lanier, had a bio in Wikipedia that credited him as an experimental music maker or filmmaker because he wrote a 5-minute long video in YouTube once. So he tried to edit the Wikipedia article to say, this is the least of the things I've done. I've been a teacher for MIT. I've been an executive at Microsoft. Those things aren't in this article. They should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They said, it's about you. You have a bias, so you're not allowed to touch the article.
Oh, wow.
Nope.
It's interesting how they, like, I mean, you can hire somebody to say what you want, but you can't do it yourself. And I get the idea behind that, but at the same time, there should be some highlighted way of this person wrote this by themselves, or maybe put it in a different section on the Wikipedia page.
It's no different than emails. There's probably guys getting paid to add stuff to.
Oh, absolutely.
So Lanier wrote a book about his Wikipedia experience and trying to edit his own article. It became a New York Times bestseller. They changed the article.
No.
Nice. To include best-selling author, but none of the other stuff, right?
Right.
I always thought Wikipedia was a great system to, overall. I really did like it. I do like it still. I think the way it's broken down, people scan instead of, read it like most people scan the web, right? Like we were talking about usability earlier. Most people do that instead of actually read it like a novel.
Wikipedia has gotten to the point where it's almost outlived its usefulness. Sort of like DMOZ.
Yeah.
At one point, Google said, we like DMOZ, we like the wide breadth, the categories, the fact that we can run focused crawls from DMOZ, and we're going to copy it and make our own Google directory, but instead of putting all the works in alphabetical order, we're going to rank them by page rank, and that was Google directory. Then at some point, they said, we're not going to do this anymore. Directories are old school. They're too old-fashioned. They're humans scaled. They don't change them quickly enough. And they're saying the same things about Wikipedia. They're not updated fast enough.
That's true. I mean,
we can't rely on facts from them. So you see less knowledge graphs that are sourcing Wikipedia as the place where they get data. You're seeing more authoritative websites as a source of information about those things.
You know what? I think that's true. I was just doing the 2 a.m. search thing last night, and it was pretty basic stuff. It was about olive trees and olive oil production and stuff, and Wikipedia was way down the page. I mean, it was still there, but it was the top results were not Wikipedia.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see across the web how far it's taken a dive in the last 5 to 6 months.
Hasn't taken a dive. It was at the top because it was placed there, like a featured snippet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But like how the featured snippets, all the tools that count featured snippets, and how many have been removed. If you look at the Wikipedia domain using any popular tool set like Ahrefs or something like that, how many featured snippets it's lost in the past 6 months.
Well, DeepMind, when it was crawling websites to get answers to questions, was relying upon the Daily Mail and CNN because of the way they're formatted. Not because
Wow.
they had better information, but because of the way they were formatted. It was easier to crawl those and collect information from them.
Parse them.
Same thing
That's
with
interesting.
Wikipedia. It's easy to
Parse.
parse. It's easy. The subject of a page is always the title of the page.
Right.
Wikipedia took over for Freebase back when that had its very short
And
time
the,
period.
and the well, almost.
Right, yeah, it's different now. Freebase was a interesting system.
Wikidata has taken over for Freebase more than Wikipedia.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
So they focus more upon structured data.
A lot, yeah. A lot more.
They use a lot of colon delimited lists, 2-row lists, usually with value, with the key and then a value. And they're easy to pull those into knowledge panels.
It makes complete sense, yeah.
And Google's doing a lot more crawling of other types of web pages other than just Wikipedia. And they're extracting entities and using programs like BERT. They're identifying parts of speech so they can build triples out of them. So they can do subject, verb, object type triples where they can answer questions.
Yeah, I definitely agree. BERT is really an amazing upgrade for Google, in my opinion. Probably one of the biggest tectonic changes in the way the Google works in the last maybe few years.
If you consider all the tools that Google has to make BERT a useful tool, like they're able to collect data from Wikipedia and from the book scanning project, that's a lot of information.
A ton, yeah.
Yeah, I love that book scanning thing. When I was doing my ancestry research,
Yeah.
and I was and researching our old farm, I was finding books that Google had scanned, the history of Bucks County. And I mean, I was a freaking addict and I was like reading this stuff. And it was really helpful. And you could, I could pull it up on the web and then I could run searches and find, and it was just, thank goodness they did that. It was really helpful.
I like that, and I like Google Scholar too, when you're really getting into
Excellent.
Yeah.
You use a Ngram viewer to find which words or phrases specific authors use the most.
Mm.
And you could find the ones for different people during the 1800s and 1900s. So I wish I had it when I was an English student.
Wait, what is this now?
The Book Project Ngram Viewer.
Huh. Because like you could do like ancestral stuff too. If you knew the name of an ancestor that might have been historically whatever.
That's possible, yeah. I mean, ideally, you use it to find out when certain words started being used lots by lots of authors all at the same time.
You could actually see the time that cool was introduced to the vernacular, and at least in the written text or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
It would
really
be like
cool.
the online version of the Oxford English Dictionary.
When did people start talking about automobiles?
Mm.
When did they start talking about airplanes? You can look in the Ngram viewer and identify when those started being written about.
One of my favorite books in my collection is Encyclopedia Britannica volume, and under aeroplane it says sea flying machines.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Oh, that is
Fine.
awesome. Aero, and it's AEROPLAN.
Yeah.
Yep. And it just says sea flying machines. It's like, wow. That's
Yeah.
about as close to the beginning of flight as you can get.
When you get to flying machines, does it show hot air balloons and things like that as well, or just airplanes?
It shows balloons, gliders, and the only powered aircraft in it is the Frank Lloyd or the Wright brothers.
Right, brother.
Wright brothers.
Wow.
How old is it?
I think it was published in 1911 ish.
Oh, okay. That's
Oh, yeah. Okay.
yeah. That's when the Wright brothers were just before World War One. Yeah.
I have some really cool books in my collection. I love them.
That is really cool. My parents had I wish I had it. My parents had Encyclopedia Britannica from the mid 50s, maybe. And one of the things I loved about it is they had this whole series for kids, and it was about children all over the world. And I really wish I had that one, because it was written for children, and it was about other children of the world, and their geography and how they lived and
That's
all this
fascinating.
stuff. And it was cool. It was really cool. And when my parents died, my sister gave it away before I could say, wait, don't give it away.
Yeah, plenty of those stories to go around.
I have one I have a whole collection from the 80s, or I should say it's my parents' house, but my father's, and my grandmother gave it to us. So I'll definitely, now that you said that, I'll take a look at it about the children's thing and see if I can find it. Sounds fascinating.
I don't know if they still did that in the 80s, but I remembered it. It was wonderful, and it was what got me interested in actually looking at the encyclopedia. Do you know what I mean? It was like the first
The intro.
step to learning. First you learn about these kids, then you can go look up more stuff in the encyclopedia itself.
I remember when the web first hit, and then thinking I can't believe I can find everything in encyclopedia right here. I mean, that was the most amazing thing in the world. But that was back when dial-up was very prominent. It was the only thing.
Oh my God, dial-up.
And different places are adding different things. Like a lot of places are adding court records, historic records of people.
Yes,
Yeah.
they are.
Do you think that's a negative or a positive for the privacy?
I'm not sure either way. I'm glad I was able to find some people who is better finding them online than offline.
That's well said. Yeah. Yeah, I guess if you have children, that would be an important thing to figure out right away.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Google took paid mugshot systems down, though. I think that was because I think if you do have the right, you're assumed guilty if there's a mugshot picture of somebody, right? And right to a fair trial and assumed innocence. I think that if they're found guilty, then whatever, keep them up. But if they're not found guilty, then take them down. But I don't think any of the site owners wanted to do that. So.
And even if they're not, I have a couple of friends whose mugshots were online, and it was old news. But, they had moved on, their lives had changed, but that freaking mugshot was still there. And that would drive me crazy. And I don't think they're there anymore, but that was...
Isn't that what the big thing it was a couple of years ago in Europe about the right to remove old stuff like that?
Right to be forgotten, yeah.
Yeah.
would do away with a lot of the reputation management we used to do. My favorite is still the bank CEO that got caught with a prostitute in his office after hours. And so whenever you searched his name, that was like one of the top 4 things that came up, and it made it hard for him to get a job.
Right.
You know, and he's like, "How do you solve this? How do you make it go away?" It's like, well, we can't make it go away. The key is to bury it.
Right.
And so we just found a bunch of people with the same name as him and promoted the crap out of them. Pushed his name down far enough that anybody who did a quick search for him only found the basics.
I have one client I was trying to remove something from, and he goes, "Let me talk to my lobbyist." It was gone 2 seconds, and all the work I had done to try to get rid of it didn't compare to what he did. Just
so you know,
yeah.
Well,
it's like knowing a Wikipedia editor or a DMOZ editor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or Terry.
Yoast made a big change to its FAQ structured data, right? It fixed the.
No, Google did, and it broke Yoast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which shouldn't surprise anybody. Crap.
But now they're
crap out.
It seems like their new system is to use blocks in the Gutenberg editor, which is interesting to me because a lot of people still use Classic on WordPress. Not everyone, hopefully, is doing that, but it's still a very prominent plugin. And I don't know. I'm assuming you can get around that in some way, but it doesn't appear like it from reading their pages. What are your opinions of adding links to FAQs?
What?
You can add links sometimes successfully to FAQ pages.
You can add links to any HTML pages. That's why they're HTML pages.
Yeah.
Kind of how it works.
Yeah, so you should be able to add links to FAQ pages.
Right. Yeah. My biggest thing I noticed was FAQ. I think we all know this. Like if you add it, it's just structured data, your impressions would skyrocket and click-through rate would sometimes drop in some cases if you're giving out too much information. So I just put the link at the bottom. It's been...
When Google added definitions and you showed definitions as a position 0 page, if your definition had something like a term to be defined, and then instead of a definition, C:\URL, they would stop using your definitions because you're showing that you weren't actually defining what the terms were. You're just telling people go see something else. I agree with that. If it's your site, you're answering questions about things that you offer on your site, and you're including links in your pages to get people to see other pages on your site, that seems like a good approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a usability thing for facts probably like 10 years ago now. And I don't remember if it was Nielsen or Jared, probably Nielsen. But the rule was if you had a FAQ on your website, it wasn't usable. Because it meant that you built it so that people couldn't find what they needed. So when I do audits and test sites, I would say, well, okay, in your situation, a FAQ might be warranted, and in your situation, it is not warranted. But I used to have to make these judgment calls based on that. But yeah, FAQs used to be the kiss of death in the usability world.
I mean, if you look at Healthline, they have evidence-based markup and fact-based markup now. That seems to be pretty. But if you look at their authors, they're all very well very authoritative, I guess, the best way to put it. They're mostly doctors or at least nurses at the bare minimum, but they're evidence-based is what always intrigued me, is they just basically go off other trusted articles.
If you're writing content that's self-defining, so you don't need to show the question and then answer, you just answer the questions as you go, it's probably a benefit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, from a conversions perspective, yes, because when the person has the question,
Yeah.
you want to have the answer right there. You don't want to continue reading and then they forget.
And when the National Cancer Institute came out with usability.gov, which was written for treatment providers of people suffering from cancer, they were working with as many providers as they could who had different talent levels when it came to HTML. And some of them were very good at designing websites and some of them were very bad. So they were the first ones to come up with an evidence-based descriptive content about usability. And they would actually say how they came up with the content they came up with and describe what sources they were using, link to those. So they weren't linking to the answers, they were linking to the sources of those answers.
Yep.
Yeah. To me, it was like you take each situation on its own, not like across the board. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. I wanted to be able to weigh it on its own.
If it was Nielsen, people have made a lot of money by doing exactly the opposite of what he said.
and Jerry Spool made lots of money by writing the exact opposite of what Nielsen said and giving a good reason why he came up with that answer.
Mm-hmm.
We used to use that as an SEO for SEO FAQs because the way they were structured was really good for ranking. That was especially many years ago, mind you, but
right. It was similar to like the sitemap, but the FAQ and the sitemaps were stuck in the footer. And you were lucky if anybody got down that far.
Right.
To even, look for that information, which is why I was advocating for, if they write the content so that as they're reading through, and they have a question on what that topic is that you're writing in that paragraph, link to the answer. For cognition reasons as well. I mean, people don't remember every single thing that you put on the page, especially if they're looking for answers. So there's just so many nuances to it.
Yeah, if you have another article written about the exact answer to that, answers the question better than the current article, it'll just show an internal link going to that article that gives better. Yeah.
Right.
I always appreciate when authors do that.
Do we have time to get into William Rock's question? What do you
That's what I was looking at.
think about this upcoming Web Core Vitals update in May?
I think it's going to be a lot worse than people think. I think if you're not already working on it, you're late.
Well, one good
I've been
thing,
working on one site for about 2 weeks now.
what I saw SpeedRank, Google's paid SpeedRank tool, which is attached to Core Web Vitals, as we know, give a lot better answers now, or a lot better scores for sites that have HTTP2. They were unfortunately not giving it as good of a score. Not that it makes a real difference at the end of the day, what the score is, but the page speed more. It's taking that into account now, which I thought was a very big plus.
The other thing that's going to be really hard about it is it's going to be very much like a Google Dance with links back in the day, because they're not going to update your web core vitals in real time. They're going to be done every 28 days, which is horseshit.
Well, I think you can go into Web Vitals, then you can look at the.
It was in an article this morning. John Mueller said 28 days. You make a change, it will take them 28 days to update your score.
What if you say fixed and validate, please?
So they're batch processing the speed information as it pertains to rankings.
I think when you change your page, they have to collect new data, and it takes them 28 days to get enough data.
Right, because they're updating the whole web in batches.
And that's a fair rendition then of actual page speed then compared to if they give 28 days.
Those tools are all whacked. If you're using those, good luck.
I agree on that.
I saw a deviation of 14 from one click to the next. So run the same page, exactly the same, and you'll get, every time you run it, you'll get a different answer.
Different answer.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too.
I'm trying to figure out if that's my server is getting hit at the same time as I'm doing the test when it goes down, and that's hurting the
Run New Relic. Run New Relic and get you'll get the network time, you'll get the DOM time, you'll get the page load time or page render time. You'll get a lot more information about the specifics of what's taking so long.
I'm using the DOM tool in the Chrome browser.
Okay. Yeah, like I love New Relic personally, but I've found that if it's fast on there, it's most likely pretty much right. But it's also great at finding errors.
If you're measuring it properly, when I do it once, I should be able to run it and it keep giving the same number every time.
Well, New Relic just as everyone comes into the server. So if the server, like the web is constantly changing with speed, I think, like depending on where you're connecting from and how many people are, cable is built. If there's a lot of people on in your area connecting, you could get slower speeds.
Well, that's what I was saying is I have to determine, is it that my server is pushed to the limit, and when too many people get on it at the same time, does it slow everything down? Or is it that the tool's just a piece of shit?
You try load testing too. That's what I do with a lot of clients is load test, and then have New Relic is so you try like a synthetic visitors, and then try to push the server to its limit, see what you can get away with, and how many virtual users it can use at the same time. And then you'll know if it's a server issue or not. I'll just
look on the server and how many people are on it, and see how many people are using it at the time.
If you have 100 concurrent users and you're seeing slower.
I own the server, so I can look and see exactly how many people are using websites at the time.
Right. One of the, I think one interesting thing is reviewsignal.com. If you guys want to see WordPress or any hosting as an honest representation of the host, they do all these, load tests, and then they use every tool in the book that you can think of to test speed, and it's really, I think, very helpful to get an insight on that, how they perform differently at the similar prices.
GT Metrics was pretty good too.
I agree.
Now,
what William said about New Relic,
it's consistent at least.
I agree with William saying that. Yeah, GT Metrics is great, and New Relic is not allowed on shared servers, and it is expensive. That's true.
The only way I could get one site to pass was for the first time ever, add a caching plugin.
Yeah, what did you use?
WP Rocket.
It's a great one.
Yeah. I look at what they do to gain that speed and determine from there. I saw another one that Darren White was looking at and you had used nitro.io. He claims it's pretty good too.
You guys see Cloudflare's recent APO?
I hate VPNs, period.
I love Fastly, but like I'll say for $5 the APO, if you look at the Kinsta test that they did, it's an amazing speed difference across the globe. Basically allows it to hit cached on the first hit, which is pretty amazing because it doesn't have to go back to the origin server, so it just caches pushes it out to all the pops. And a lot like what you could do with Fastly. But for a $5 add-on, I think it's amazing.
Well, guys, we're at the top of the hour. So I want to thank you all for joining us.
Well,
Have a
that
good
was
week.
fast.
That was fast. Take care now. Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.